Alright, so I've now got all the mortises cut into our pieces here. And so each piece took about 10 minutes totals, and so it's about 40 minutes overall for the whole process of cutting the mortises. Now, when you think about it, that's actually pretty good. If you compare that to something like a router, the router might be a little bit faster for the actual cutting process, but then you still have to go back through and square up all your mortises. And definitely compared to hand chiseling all these mortises out, I'd be here for days trying to do that. So the mortisers are a nice, really fast way to very safely and comfortably get through this process. And so going back to comparison with the router may be faster if you're doing a lot of mortises because you can just kind of plunge through very quickly, but it's also a lot more dangerous and a lot more annoying. You know, when you're using a router to cut mortises, you have to make sure that you're wearing a face mask, eye protection, all that stuff. You're making a big mess, you're covering yourself in dust. It's not a very fun process, and there's a lot that can go wrong. If you're cutting through with your router and the router bit grabs or slips, you're going to destroy your leg pretty quickly. And if anything ever goes wrong, like you're bringing the router bit out of the piece of wood and something jams up or catches, you've now got a very large machine in your hands that can cause a lot of damage. So the mortiser is just a nice, safe, comfortable way to work at it. And so you guys probably saw in the clips that there was a lot of smoke coming from the mortising bit. And so anytime you're cutting in white oak, maple, hickory, any of your really hardwoods, you're going to get a lot of smoking and burning coming from your mortising bit, just because there's a lot of heat buildup in those bits, and the chips just generally tend to ignite easier on harder hardwoods like this. They don't tend to eject as well as something like cherry or walnut, but even those, you are still going to get a little bit burning. The upside is if you've ever smoked anything with maple, that's kind of what my whole shop smells like right now, and it smells delicious, and my mouth is watering a little bit. And so it's a really nice smell. And there's really no damage to any of our mortises. There's no burning anywhere on our side of our mortises. It just means that, as that auger bit is spinning around in that metal tube, there's a lot of heat build up in there, and it's just burning the wood chips that are coming out before they can get ejected. So it's not really a problem, and it's not really anything to worry about with your bit. That was a brand new bit from Lee Valley, one of their premium bits, which comes really sharp and really nice. So all I'm going to do to just get it back up to full functional condition is I'm just going to clean the bit with some resin cleaner, the same stuff you use on a table saw blade, because all I can tell in there is there's a little bit of burnt material and a little bit of resin buildup. Other than that, the bit was cutting just fine all the way up to the last mortise. And so the next step here is to do all the milling on the side stretchers, go through, get them all milled up to their final thickness, width, length, all that stuff. Then we're going to start getting going on the tenons. Alright, so now we've got all of our tenons cut, all of our mortises cut, and I went through and labeled which pieces are going where. So I just put a letter beside the mortise, put the same letter on the tenon of the piece, so I know what's going where and I don't mix anything up right now. Before we do the glue up, obviously we'll go through and label them somewhere else, either on the tenon or hidden somewhere on the piece. Again, so I don't mess it up, but for now, just writing it on there will be just fine. And so I really love this method of working with mortise and tenon joinery. Combining the mortiser, the nice square mortises that come out of it, and a dado stack in the table saw is just spectacular. I've tried tons of different ways of cutting tenons in the past, using a designated tenon jig, doing it that same way, but with just leaving a normal FTG blade in there, and going over to the bandsaw after scoring it on the table saw. And just none of them have ever worked as well as this, because I was able to sneak up on an absolutely perfect fit. All of these tenons are just about a perfect fit. Most of them do fit in nicely, but ones like this one are just a little bit tight and can be cleaned up very quickly and easily with the block plane, which is full of dust. And so the reason this works so well is because my table saw is very accurate. It's a high quality table saw. Again, SawStop is just about the best table saws on the market. And so the nice thing is that when I load the dado stack up in there, I can very slowly creep up on the fit of these tenons. And because, again, I'm referencing my nice flat and square cross-cutting sled, I can very easily sneak up on the tenon width and make sure that it fits our 1/4 inch mortise chisel slots that we already cut. And so it's a very accurate way of working, which is exactly what I like. And it's using my machinery the most effective way possible. And so I've already done one side, got it all fitted up. And so that's what it looks like. It's very solid together. Again, these are probably the best fitting tenons I've ever made, surprisingly enough. So I was able to get it together with some nice clamping force. And it's, the tenons are tight enough together that they are, it's holding itself together fully. So this is absolutely perfect. I could not ask for a better result than this. Everything is, as close to flush as I need it to be. Again, there is some variation because the mortiser does move a little bit and the tenons are not always going to be perfect. There is some human error in there. But overall, there's nothing in here that I can't work with easily. So I'm super happy with the current results that we're getting. So I've got both of the sides all fully together now. They're all holding with their own, just the tension of the tenons in there themselves. No glue or anything, and they're actually really strong. I can put my full weight on any rung on here and it will hold it completely. So I'm not worried about this thing falling apart no matter what. I'm only 150 pounds soaking wet, but it should still hold up to being used as a changing table, hopefully. And so now what we need to do is we need to make the internal panel here that's going to cover up all this craziness on the inside here. And so to do that, we're going to try and get 2 book mesh panels. So the reason I've waited to do the panels until now, normally I would do this, right at the beginning, so that when I reach this stage, I can just go with the panels, get them in, get them fitted, all that. But I wanted to wait a little while just to make sure I was okay with actually putting maple in here and not adding like a contrasting wood or anything. But again, my sister wants to keep this nice, clean, and simple, so we're just going to go with a nice, simple maple panel, but I'm going to try and get a little fancy with it and book match it. So I've done a lot of resawing on my bandsaw since I got it. It's probably, I don't even know. For a while, I was only buying 8/4 stock because I thought it was just so much better to buy 8/4 stock, and I was doing a lot of resawing. So I have a pretty good idea on how to do it. And so the best way I found to do it is to not use the resawing fence or the guide bar or any of that stuff that comes with it. The best way that I found to resaw is to get your piece somewhat milled up. So what you want to do is get it to close to your final width. So the best thing to do is, go like we did with the rest of the milling process. Join one edge, get it nice, square, and flat. Make sure you're referencing one of your faces and make sure you remember which face that is so you can compare that later on. And then go and rip it down to a rough width on the bandsaw. So I'm looking for pieces that are 5 and 5/32 wide. And so these are about 5 1/4 wide. So I've got a little bit of extra on there that I can clean up later on. But it's not a ton of extra work for the bandsaw to cut through. And so then once you've got that, I like to use a marking gauge because what you can do with the marking gauge really accurately is put a knife line down the whole line of the board. Now this will wear out your marking gauge blade very quickly, but it is very worthwhile when you want to try and get an accurately book matched panel. So from there, all you want to try and do is get this somewhat centered. You want to just off centered. I've got about 1/8 of an inch gap between my lines from running this down either side of the board. And then I like to go in and fill those knife lines with some pencil. So I get my 2mm pencil here, I get it nice and sharp, and I can run it right down the lines, and you can kind of see on the camera there how there's just now these two nice, easy to read dark lines running down the whole length of the board. And so now what I'm going to use on the bandsaw is these micro jig gripper blocks. Now I love these things for resawing because you can really get a lot of holding force on the actual board itself and guide it through the blade. Now the reason I like doing this rather than using the fence is because if you're going to use the fence to resaw on a bandsaw, your piece needs to be perfectly flat and square. And we're talking perfect. It can't have any deviation over the length of anything. It has to be a perfectly milled piece of stock. Because I want to try and get 3/8 of an inch pieces out of this board, I want to try and split it perfectly in half. If I go through the full milling process, I'm gonna lose a lot of material. So right now I'm working with true 4/4 stock, so that works out to be about 15/16 wide. So if I resaw this in half, I have a way better chance of getting that 3/8 stock. Whereas once I've gone through the milling process, I might just get 3/8 stock out of it. And so this is just the better way I've found, because the trick here is it does take a lot more skill and practice. So if you're new to a bandsaw, take your time, learn how to use it before you try and do something like this. But all you're doing is you're just trying to keep the blade nice and centered in that guide that we already put on there with the marking gauge and the pencil. So it's very easy to just keep the blade on track in there, and you can do minor course corrections to keep that blade perfectly aligned.